If you could time travel back to the Qing dynasty, who would you like to be? Some of you might think being the emperor or the empress sounds like a nice gig. I mean, they were the most powerful and could do whatever they wanted, right? But actually, modern Chinese pop culture recommends that we should all become members of the Imperial Household Department, 内务府. This department was often seen as the true masters of the Forbidden City, and it meant a fast track to money and influence. A newly appointed officer could buy a mansion in Beijing's most expensive district within days of taking office. Corruption was so blatant that officials treated embezzlement as if it were an openly given right, practically hauling government silver directly home. But couldn't the emperor and the empress already just buy whatever they wanted? This is where it gets interesting. As the managers of the emperor's household, the Imperial Household Department actually controlled the emperor's money. Anything that the emperor wanted, he had to get it through this department. Over time, the emperor lost control over his own finances and was instead controlled by the very department meant to serve him, which was absolutely crazy. Hey everyone, I'm Amy. Today we'll be talking about the Imperial Household Department and the fascinating stories of how its corruption controlled the very lives of the emperor and the Forbidden City. Before getting to corruption and money-making schemes, let's start by quickly going over what the Imperial Household Department was actually in charge of. Think of it less as a government department, but more like the emperor's personal butlers and service staff. The Forbidden City was gigantic, the city within a city. It covers about 720,000 square meters, with over 900 buildings, with more than 70 palaces and over 8,000 rooms, all surrounded by a 10-meter-high wall and a moat 52 meters wide. It is still the largest palace complex in the world today. Now, imagine what it took to run this place. Tens of thousands of staff, thousands of residents, endless rituals, food, clothing, security, repairs. Everything had to be flawless. Enter the Imperial Household Department and its 10 court departments, known as the 7 offices and 3 courts, staffed largely by bondservants of the upper 3 banners and eunuchs. They were responsible for all of the day-to-day operations of the Forbidden City, as well as the management of all properties belonging to the emperor outside of the imperial palace. First was the Office of Palace Treasury, 广储司. This office was basically the emperor's warehouse, storing the wealth of the emperor. This wealth could be silver, fur, porcelain, fine silk, and even the imperial palace's tea supply. It also managed the wardrobe of the emperor and the imperial harem. Next, there was the Office of Huntsmanship, 都御司. This was the guard office of the Imperial Household Department, handling the personnel management and assignments of its guards and military officers. This office also organized the imperial hunts and fishing expeditions. The Office of Ceremonies, 掌仪司, was the official party planners. This office handled all of the ceremonies and rituals of the inner court, including imperial birthday celebrations, imperial funerals, and major ceremonies such as the Silkworm ceremony. And of course, we need to have payroll, which was the Office of Accounting, 会计司. This office managed the palace finances. It tracked all of the money going in and out, managed the payroll of the palace workers, and oversaw the revenue from private estates and properties of the emperor. The Office of Works, 营造司, was responsible for the construction and maintenance of the actual buildings of the Forbidden City, including the palaces and temples. The Office of Imperial Herds, 庆奉司, managed the livestock of the Forbidden City, overseeing the imperial pastures and ranches. This office directly supplied the meat for food in the imperial palace, as well as the animals needed for the imperial rituals. And then there was the Office of Justice, 慎刑司. This was a private justice department for the emperor's bondservants. This meant that if a member of the Imperial Household Department broke the law, they were tried and punished by this office, keeping the matters separate from the regular state legal system. After the 7 offices, we have the 3 courts. The imperial stables, 上寺院, managed all of the horses owned by the emperor. The imperial armory, 武备院, was the emperor's personal weapons factory. It crafted and supplied the weapons and equipment for the imperial bodyguards, palace guards, and even the emperor himself. And then there was the Imperial Parks Administration, Fengchen Yuan, which managed and maintained the imperial gardens and parks around the Forbidden City. These properties were both for the emperor's personal use as well as for imperial ceremonies. And these 7 offices and 3 courts, 七司三院, were just the beginning. The Imperial Household Department has over 50 more smaller subdivisions for all kinds of tasks, from managing the official tea service to overseeing the imperial musicians. One of the most important subdivisions was the Chamber of Attendants, 进士房, which managed the eunuchs and palace maids of the Forbidden City. This office also managed the emperor's intimate life, keeping a detailed log of his visits to his consorts. As you can see, the Imperial Household Department managed a lot of responsibilities. Under Emperor Jiaqing, it is recorded that the Imperial Household Department had several thousand administrators. While early versions of the Imperial Household Department existed in the early Qing dynasty, it was fully established under the reign of Emperor Kangxi. He wanted to avoid the overwhelming power and corruption that eunuchs held in the Ming dynasty. So he used his loyal bondservants to manage the operations of the imperial palace instead. And then he granted control of the Imperial Household Department to people that he could trust, his own imperial family and high-ranking Manchu nobility. The Imperial Household Department was set up to protect imperial secrecy and to handle imperial affairs outside of the eyes of the government system. The emperor wanted personal control over the department that ran his own household. On paper, this was brilliant. Who could be more trustworthy than family? But a system is only as reliable as the people running it. As the Imperial Household Department grew larger and more complex, with more and more people, the loopholes multiplied. It was simply too much for one emperor to manage. And then there was a critical flaw in the design. The Imperial Household Department was the emperor's private service. It was not subject to the jurisdictions of the regular government inspectors and courts. This meant it was a closed system, accountable only to itself. And guess what happens when a powerful entity is only accountable to itself? Well, it turns out that money has no relatives. Even though the Imperial Household Department could be trusted to keep things running, they made sure to make money for themselves at every turn. An old Beijing saying says that a new house, freshly planted trees, and modern-style paintings on the wall, that family must belong to the Imperial Household Department. This was a testament to the common belief that any financially successful family in Beijing must have had connections to the Imperial Household Department. In addition, the ranks of the department officials rose higher and higher throughout the Qing dynasty. Eventually, the head of the Imperial Household Department was a second-grade government official. This was a status that was equal to major government ministers. As the official of the Imperial Household Department gained in rank, they started to gain power and influence even outside of the Forbidden City. The Imperial Household Department had mutated into an unstoppable force that was independent of both throne and state, with its own rules, its own interests, and its own survival instincts. It was its own empire within an empire. And within this monstrosity was a complex web of relationships, all bound together by family ties, marriages, and networks of influence. Reforming it was like cutting into a tangled knot of bloodlines and interests. Anyone who tried quickly found themselves overwhelmed. Like the heads of a hydra, even if you were to cut down one head, many more quickly rose to take its place. What's ironic is that Emperor Kangxi implemented the Imperial Household Department in order to prevent the kind of systematic corruption that brought down the Ming dynasty. But the Imperial Household Department unfortunately went down a similar path as its predecessor and became a department of great wealth, influence, and unimaginable corruption. The Imperial Household Department was built on a complicated system with strict rules. So if the rules were so strict, how did corruption work? An ancient Chinese saying goes, above there is policy, below there are countermeasures. This saying perfectly describes that corruption always circumvents policy. Let's start with a famous story from the anecdotes from the Chinese imperial courts. This unofficial story involves Emperor Daoguang, who ruled from 1820 to 1850, was historically recorded as an incredibly frugal emperor. It is recorded that Emperor Daoguang always asked for his worn clothes to be patched instead of replaced. As Emperor Daoguang continued his trend of patching his clothes, it became somewhat of a fashion statement in the court. Court officials also started to wear patches on their clothes as a sign of their support of the emperor, as well as their own frugality. One day, the emperor noticed a prominent patch on the trousers of a grand counselor named Cao Zhenyong. The emperor asked Cao Zhenyong, "You patch your clothes too?" Cao Zhenyong replied, "It is expensive to replace, so I patched it instead." Curious about the cost, the emperor then asked, "How much does it cost to patch clothes outside of the palace?" Cao Zhenyong was caught off guard and noticed that the surrounding eunuchs were all staring at him. He panicked. He knew that the imperial household department must have overcharged the emperor, but he had no idea by how much. To be safe, he gave out what he thought would be a huge number. He said, "It costs 3 maces of silver." 10 maces of silver was equivalent to 1 tael of silver, and in that time period, 3 maces of silver was already more than enough to buy a brand new outfit. So he thought what he had already given is a really high number. But he was shocked when he heard the emperor sigh and say, "It is so much cheaper outside the palace. It costs the imperial household department 5 taels of silver to patch my clothes." Cao Zhenyong was speechless. He knew that the emperor was incredibly overcharged, but he was scared of retribution from the imperial household department, so he didn't dare say another word. In his attempt to save money, Emperor Daoguang paid more money to patch his clothes than the actual cost of multiple sets of brand new outfits. Emperor Daoguang ruled for 30 years and tried his best to save money for the empire. But the unfortunate reality was that his effort was mostly in vain. By that time in the Qing dynasty, the imperial household department had already become too powerful and too corrupt. It was no longer something that could be saved by one man, not even if he was the emperor. Another famous story about Emperor Daoguang involves a bowl of glass noodle soup, fentang. So this unofficial story says that Emperor Daoguang loved glass noodle soup. One day, he ordered the palace kitchen to prepare it. However, days passed and he still didn't get his glass noodle soup. Confused, he asked the imperial household department about it. The department official complained, "Your Majesty, making glass noodle soup in the palace is very expensive. We're still trying to raise the funds." Emperor Daoguang was furious. How expensive can glass noodle soup be? The department official explained that they would need to establish a new glass noodle soup office inside the imperial kitchen, with a new team of staff, which would cost around 50,000 taels of silver. Adding the cost of the materials and food ingredients, the total cost would be around 60,000 taels of silver a year. Emperor Daoguang scoffed. "Nonsense. Before I became emperor, I ate glass noodle soup at a street vendor right outside of the palace. It cost only 2 copper coins for a bowl. Just send someone there to buy it every day." More days passed, and the emperor still had not received his glass noodle soup. Frustrated, he asked the imperial household department what was going on. The official explained, "We searched everywhere outside the palace, but could not find any vendor selling glass noodle soup. We're planning on search further, but if we search too far, we would not be able to bring the glass noodle soup fresh." What had really happened? The imperial household department actually drove every glass noodle soup vendor out of the city, just to make sure that there was no other way for the emperor to get the glass noodle soup. Defeated, Emperor Daoguang gave up. He didn't want to spend 60,000 taels of silver just for glass noodle soup. So he said, "In that case, I won't eat glass noodle soup anymore. The emperor wanted service, but the imperial household department wanted money. In the end, the emperor couldn't even get a bowl of glass noodle soup unless he paid the price. The notes from the Southern Pavilion tells us another fascinating unofficial story. This story involves the Grand Counselor Yan Jingming, who served in the Qing Dynasty Grand Council from 1882 to 1884. Yan Jingming was a famously frugal man who tried to manage the budget and lower the costs of the empire. In this story, Yan Jingming saw a request from the Imperial Household Department for a sum of money to purchase 100 leather trunks at a cost of 60 taels of silver each. He knew that a leather trunk would not cost more than 6 taels of silver, so he brought this issue before Empress Dowager Cixi. He claimed, a leather trunk costs no more than 6 taels of silver. I strongly suspect that there is embezzlement and fraud within the imperial household department. Empress Dowager Cixi replied with a surprise. It wouldn't be that cheap, would it? Yan Jingming insisted that 6 taels was already a high estimate. So Empress Dowager Cixi told him, in that case, I will give you 600 taels of silver. You have half a month. Go ahead and buy me 100 leather trunks. Yan Jingming thought to himself, half a month? I could probably get this done in an hour. He took the silver and went straight to the largest store for leather trunks in Beijing at the time. But when he got there, the store was closed. He went around the city and found that every single store for leather trunks was closed. He was extremely confused until one store owner secretly told him that an imperial eunuch came by earlier and ordered every store selling leather trunks to close for half a month. Violations was threatened with arrest and confiscation of goods. Yan Jingming couldn't believe it. The imperial household department not only immediately found out about the task he had received, but had already moved one step ahead of him to sabotage it completely. He was dumbfounded. It was absurd and infuriating all at once. But he wasn't ready to give up. He decided to send his personal attendant to the nearby city of Tianjin. His friend was a high-ranking official at Tianjin and would be able to help him buy the leather trunks. However, half a month later, his personal attendant did not return, and he still had no leather trunks. Without any leather trunks, he had failed his task from the Empress Dowager. Thankfully, he was not punished, but his attempt to investigate the imperial household department was stopped before it even began. Frustrated, he tried to find out what happened to his personal attendant. It turned out that the imperial household department had bribed his trusted attendant with 1,000 taels of silver to disappear. His message and request for help never reached Tianjin at all. So the corruption was rampant, and it was clear. Why didn't the emperor do anything about it? Well, some emperors certainly tried. Let's take a look at an unofficial story involving Emperor Guangxu, who ruled from 1875 to 1908. In this story, even the emperor was not able to take down a single mid-level official from the imperial household department, which perfectly shows just how powerful this department had become in the late Qing dynasty. This story starts with Emperor Guangxu wanting to have 4 bracelets made as a birthday gift for the Empress Dowager Cixi. Qin Kuan, the official in charge of the project, presented 4 beautiful samples to the Empress Dowager, who loved all of them. He then showed them to Emperor Guangxu. When the emperor asked how much they would cost, Qin Kuan replied that the price would be 40,000 taels of silver. Emperor Guangxu was so shocked, he blurted out, "Are you trying to bankrupt me?" It turned out that the emperor had distrusted the imperial household department for a while and had started to save up private money outside of the imperial palace. Somehow, Qin Kuan had discovered how much money the emperor had and asked for the exact amount in order to complete the task. Emperor Guangxu had no choice but to pay, but kept his eye on Qin Kuan going forward. In the Qing dynasty court, Even the emperor could not order the demotion or execution of an official without a justified reason. He needed evidence of Qin Kuan's wrongdoings. He wanted Qin Kuan severely punished. After several more suspicious projects happened, Emperor Guangxu launched an investigation and charged Qin Kuan with multiple crimes, including embezzlement and treason. However, for some reason, not enough evidence could be discovered to charge Qin Kuan with the death penalty. The emperor had no choice but to lower the charges and instead charged Qin Kuan with violating protocol and ordered that Qin Kuan be dismissed from office and his property seized. So that's great, right? One corrupt official down. But a short while later, another powerful position opened up outside of Beijing. This was the incredibly lucrative Jiangxi Salt Intendant position, a job that managed the salt supply for an entire province. And somehow, Qin Kuan got the job. He was formally appointed by the Board of Civil Appointments to this position. The entire bureaucratic system colluded to put Qin Kuan back in power, directly defying the emperor. The politics and personal connections that made this possible were so confusing that Emperor Guangxu ultimately couldn't even figure out how it happened. This story is a testament to the culture of collusion in the late Qing dynasty. It was typical for all of the officials involved in a project to work together to shield each other and hide evidence. This made it difficult, and sometimes impossible, to successfully prove any crimes. So why would anyone work together against the emperor? Isn't it better to sabotage each other to seize power and wealth for yourself? This is where the corruption of the imperial household department is especially fascinating. Which brings us to our last story. This is the unofficial story of Emperor Guangxu's wedding in 1889. In this story, a group of importers heard that the palace was commissioning work for the wedding. They had a friend, Mr. Guo, who had a connection in the imperial household department. Through this connection, Mr. Guo helped them to land the job of embroidering a door curtain for the wedding. They calculated the cost of materials, their own wages, including a fair profit margin, and determined that they should charge 50 taels of silver for the job. When they delivered the finished curtain, the personal attendant of the managing official asked them to submit their bill, and gently encouraged them to report a bit more, as it won't be a problem. The importers were not sure how much more was a bit more, so they went back with a bill of 500 taels of silver for the job, 10 times the real value. The personal attendant suggested that 500 taels of silver was a low cost for the curtain and gently reminded them again that they should quote for more. So the importers tried again, this time boldly asking for 1,000 taels, 20 times the real value. The updated bill was submitted, and the personal attendant presented to the managing official. But the bill was rejected, not because it was too high, but because it was still too low. He sent it back with sterner instructions to quote an even higher price. The importers were scared, but Mr. Guo decided to make a bold bid and submitted a new bill for 5,000 taels, 100 times the real value. They were apprehensive with this bid, fearing that it would be rejected for being too high. But when the managing official received this new bill, instead of rejecting it once again, he personally took his brush and added a 2 in front of the 5,000, making the final bill 25,000 taels of silver. The imperial household department paid this final bill without any questions. The managing official personally pocketed 20,000 taels of silver. Mr. Guo used 1,000 taels of silver to thank the personal attendant and the other connections who helped make this business happen. Mr. Guo then kept 3,000 taels of silver for himself and gave the importers the final 1,000 taels of silver. This sounds like a lot less than the billed amount of 25,000 taels of silver. But remember, the importers originally only wanted 50 taels of silver. This was the biggest payday that the importers had ever seen. Every single person involved in the process got their cut, and everybody was happy. except maybe the emperor. But at this point, what could he do? When everyone involved gets a payout, a wall of silence goes up. Nobody wants to rat out a system that feeds them all. As a popular Chinese saying goes, when one prospers, all prosper. And when one suffers, all suffer. The operation of the Imperial Household Department had become the perfect crime, repeated thousands of times a day, bleeding the empire dry from the inside out. Back in the Han Dynasty, the emperors tried to reduce the power and influence of the imperial family and the high-ranking nobility by giving power to the eunuchs. This eventually backfired, with the eunuchs becoming too powerful and deeply corrupted. Ironically, in trying to prevent eunuch power, the Qing dynasty system came full circle back to a world where certain imperial family members and high-ranking nobles held too much power and influence through the imperial household department that the emperor could no longer control them. The very problem eunuchs were meant to solve returned in a different form. Is corruption the only possible ending? What would you have done differently if you were the emperor? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed today's topic, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to support this channel and help me uncover more fascinating stories from Chinese history, please check out my membership and become a Noble Baoban. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.